it starts with mindset. Do I even believe this is possible? Then it goes to desire. Do I want this for myself? And then it goes to action. Can I do something about it? And then it goes to cycling that over and over again before you reach the moment of success.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams, and I've got Travis Chappell today on the podcast, and he has a podcast that's been going for a while, like 6 years. He's doing multiple episodes a week. He's had some really cool people on his podcast, like Grant Cardone, Shaquille O'Neal, Ed Millett, and I think the list just goes on and on and on because he's done over 800 episodes. And podcast has gained some traction. It's supporting him. And I want to find out, what he's done to grow it, what tricks have gotten him to be able to have, some of these cool people like Shaq or Grant Cardone or whomever, John Maxwell, on his podcast, and how that's helped him to be able to get on other people's podcasts. He's been on EO Fire. He's been on a podcast called Bigger Pockets. It's very, very popular in the real estate space, and done some other cool stuff. And I think the podcast is supporting that. So we'll find out how. And without further ado, what's going on, Travis?
Doing really well. How are you?
I'm well, and it's good to have you. A lot of people know you. You've been crushing it. You've been consistent for a long, long time. I want to ask, the first question would be 90-something%. It's nearly 1% actually go after, I think it's 20 episodes or something. But what got you to be that person that's kept going? And was it hard?
Yes, it was hard, but the thing that got me going, or the thing that kept me going, was just a commitment to keep going. It sounds almost obviously simple, but that really was what it was for me, because most people will start a podcast kind of on a whim, and they're just kind of like, oh, let's start a podcast. And they get super excited, they name it, and they buy some fancy equipment, and they record an episode, and they release it, and nobody listens to it. And then they release another one 3.5 weeks later because they forgot to record. And then even fewer people listen to the second episode. And then by episode number 4, they forgot to record. And then their equipment's collecting dust and being listed on Facebook Marketplace. For me, I was actively looking for a new career path. And I was an avid podcast listener. And I came across a podcast course, took the course, and decided that that was what I was going to do. So when I started my show, I committed to 2 full years of podcasting, regardless of the results. That was my commitment at the very beginning. I'm doing 2 full years, 3 episodes a week when I started, all interviews. So 2 years of 3 interviews per week. I'm doing that minimum. And then I'll renegotiate with myself after 2 years if things aren't going very well. I don't want to waste time. But that's the nice thing about podcasting, is if you're doing it about something that you care about, it's never a waste of time. The worst case scenario is I connected with 3 people per week for 2 years talking about entrepreneurship, which was something I really wanted to talk about and get more into myself. And so 2 years of 3 episodes a week, that's 300 new conversations that I had with people about a topic that was something that I wanted to learn more about. So even if I got 0 listeners or whatever, or the metrics that I was expecting weren't hit, it would still have been a good use of my time at that time.
Speaking of a time, was there a time that you still wanted to quit within those first 2 years?
For sure. Probably around the 12 to 18 month mark, because I felt like I was gaining some serious headway in terms of the people I was interviewing. My interviewability was getting better. I was connecting with more people. My download numbers weren't reflecting any of that. So I was on the top charts. I was on the top entrepreneurship charts for a year and a half. Just we're stagnant. We were 400 to 600 downloads an episode or something like that, which is better than probably 85% of shows, 80% of shows anyway. But with as much effort as I was putting into it, just didn't feel like I was getting the results that I wanted to get. And so, I definitely thought about quitting before that 2 years was up. But that was the thing that kept me in it. It was just I committed to this. I'm going to do it for the 2 years, regardless.
How would the listener know whether they should just stay committed when they're not getting the results that they wanted, or to go ahead and quit because it's not working? How would they know?
It's a matter of asking yourself the right questions. And I've been studying this a lot recently, man, because obviously, you interview people, I interview people. I think that interviewing and asking good questions is a really valuable skill beyond just the podcast mic. I think it's super helpful in persuasion when it comes to selling and talking to potential clients and prospects. It's super helpful in interpersonal relationships to understand where the other party's coming from in your marriage and your relationship with your kids. I think asking the right questions is paramount in all of those things. And I think it's especially important with your relationship with yourself. And this is a good example of that. If you quit something, it's not necessarily an indication that you're a quitter. It's potentially an indication that it's not something that you cared to push past, or it's not something that triggered a deep enough why inside of you to continue moving past the obstacles. Because everything's going to be hard. If you want to do anything noteworthy, anything extraordinary, it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be pain involved. And so there has to be either a deep why or a passion for this certain thing, commitment that extends far beyond the day-to-day pain and struggle and ups and downs of the journey. And if you're listening and you're like, I don't really care about my podcast. I don't really care about the result. I don't care if it goes well or goes poorly. I'm just done. Okay, cool. Maybe you should be done. Maybe you should start a different podcast about something you actually care enough about to talk about for a long period of time, instead of doing it specifically for this one reason because somebody told you had to niche down. So now you're talking about like whatever helicopter parts, and you have no desire to talk about helicopter parts, but you were told to niche down. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to do that for a long time. And you don't care about it. Nobody else cares about it. Nobody's listening. Your audience can tell you don't care about it. The ones that are listening, you know what I mean? So I would say that it's a matter of introspection. Just ask yourself a couple of questions. Number one, if I were to continue doing this and continue getting the same result, would I be upset with myself in 3 years, 1 year, 5 years, whatever time period, if this continued to happen? And like I said, for some people, that answers might be no. I don't think I'd be upset with myself. All I'm doing is having fantastic conversations with people that normally wouldn't take the time to talk to me about a topic that I really like talking about, that I really want to know more about, that I really want to be more well connected in. Or you might ask yourself that question and be like, I would be really upset if that didn't happen. Like if this one result didn't happen, which is largely out of my control, which is like download growth, right? Like there's some things that you can do to make your show grow. But at the end of the day, though, the ones that grow like crazy, the outsized success shows, are never directly correlated to purposeful activity around growing the show. Typically, I shouldn't say never, but they are typically not related to that. They're just typically related to a trend, luck, timing, something happening in the market, and you can't replicate that type of success. You can do things to grow the show over a longer period of time. But if that's the only scenario that you're going to be happy in, is like, I better have 10 million downloads a month in 5 years or I'm not going to be happy, then like maybe you should quit now, because it's probably not going to happen. Even if you put money and energy and time into growing the show, it probably isn't going to happen. So you have to ask yourself, like, what's, the worst case scenario here? What's the worst case scenario? And am I okay with that worst case scenario? Then secondarily, what's the best case scenario? And is the worst case scenario bad enough to keep me from the potential upside of the best case scenario? And that was always the answer to me, was always like, no, it's not enough to keep me. Because like the best case scenario to me is I end up building a really great audience over a long period of time. And if I chose to in 5 years from now, hopefully I would just be able to do my podcast and still pull in 7 figures a year just on sponsorships and brand deals and affiliate stuff, because I worked for over a decade on building my podcast audience. That's not a terrible scenario to me. You know what I mean? There's still a bunch of other things that it does for me in the meantime. So like, to me, like, it was always looking at the future and being like, the potential upside far outweighs any of the risk. Because my biggest risk is like some time, but the time that I'm using to do this is profitable use of my time and productive use of my time anyway, because I'm connecting with cool people, talking about interesting things, and building relationships with people that I'm potentially going to do business with anyway. Like, it's not a waste of my time, even if it doesn't have this outsized success and download numbers. But best case scenario, it does get that, and that's even better. So if you're listening to me right now going like, I don't care about any of that, probably, maybe try something else. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or maybe change the topic of your show to something you give a shit about and see if that changes your mind or your attitude about it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I've got a lot of questions for you. I hope we have time for all of them. One is talking about all of these good guests. So I'm sure it's not easy, at least for most of us. Maybe it is for you, but probably not easy for most of us to have Grant Cardone on our podcast, or John Maxwell, or Shaquille O'Neal. There's a few people that probably have gatekeepers that are just blocking, that are just like, nope, he's too busy.
Yep.
And what I really want to know and understand on having those guests is, do you feel like those guests grow your podcast? And the reason I ask is I'm thinking about a listener who's a podcaster, and just curious if you feel like they should be focused on really well-known people.
The answer is yes. When I first started, I had this quote written on the top of my whiteboard in my studio at the time, which was not much of a studio. And it was a Steve Martin quote that said, "Be so good they can't ignore you." And I remember looking at that thinking, like, this is my plan of action here, because at the end of the day, I was 24 at the time. I was a door-to-door sales guy that had an unaccredited degree from a local Bible college, and I wasn't even in ministry. So in terms of why anybody should listen to me, I didn't really come up with a good enough reason. However, I knew that if I found the right people, that at some level, you can no longer ignore what I'm doing. You have to pay attention at some level, meaning that, like, if I went tomorrow and I got Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and whatever, Ben Shapiro in a room together, and I interviewed all of them at the same time, it would inevitably go viral. I would need $0 in ad spend. And within 30 days, that interview would have 20 million views on YouTube and a couple million downloads on my podcast. It would go viral. The clips that we would post on that, from on TikTok to Instagram to Facebook, would all go viral. So that's obviously the most exaggerated example of this. But the example holds true at every level. So the answer is yes. And when I see, most of the time, and I'm not trying to throw shade at anybody, I'm friends with everybody in the industry. From time to time, when I see people that are saying, like, you don't need this, you don't need that, and famous people don't do anything for your show, and blah, 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 almost every time I'm trying to think, it could be true, maybe misremembering, but I don't think I've ever seen anybody that has good people on their show say that. It's usually people who have never interviewed anybody famous or anybody really good on their show.
That cuts deep.
Yeah, because they're talking trash about something that they have not been able to accomplish yet.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to take away credibility from that method, because it's a difficult method through which to grow your show. But if you look at the top people that are real podcasters, right? Because there's some podcasters that have massive shows, but not true podcasters. They're an influencer who started a show, or they're a celebrity who started a show. But if you look at the top podcasters, like people who are just like Jordan Harbinger, he's a through and through podcaster. He's been podcasting for 15 years. He's a famous podcaster who's known for podcasting, and he podcasts and makes a living podcasting and does very well doing it. Ask him. He's going to say the same thing. Yes, it is about the guests that you get. Now, after you get the guest, you also have to be really good at interviewing the guest. But getting them is the first thing. And those name draws will not only help with your download numbers on those episodes, but it'll also help with credibility while you reach out to other guests, authority in your ability to put out content into the world where people will give you more clout and authority just because you've associated your name with somebody else. And then on social, it gives you more opportunities to reach a larger, broader audience. Like a lot of our top posts, if you went through our Instagram and you looked at like all of our top posts in terms of like view count and impressions, almost all of them are Instagram collaborations with people that I've interviewed on my podcast. So when we interview them, we create amazing repurposed shorts and clips and reels. And on Instagram specifically, you can request a collaboration with those people. And if they accept it, it goes out to both of your audiences at the same time. And so we've reached hundreds of thousands of people that we wouldn't have reached if I was just doing a solo show, because they all have massive audiences. If you can put together an interview that gets content from them that's really unique and interesting, they're happy to share it. You know what I mean? You just have to create better content, because that's another thing is, you know, people are always like, well, how do you get your guests to share? And it's like, most of the time, I'm not like going to my guests and begging them to share. I basically just let them know that their episode's live. And a lot of times they'll ask me like, hey, where's the link to that episode? I want to make sure my audience gets that. Or they'll ask me for the entire audio file so they can go drop it on their show because the interview was so good and they wanted to make sure their audience heard this one. You know, so if you're having trouble with your guests sharing your content, sometimes it might be related to the idea that it just wasn't that good. Like it is not their, they don't owe you anything.
Yeah.
Is my point. Like you as the host, it's your job to make a compelling interview, to ask interesting, unique questions from different angles, to be well researched, well prepped, have great conversation. And people will remember that, and then they'll be way more likely to share it.
How do you do the collaborations? Like, it sounds like you started to give us kind of the backbone of it, the structure of it, but I'm not clear. Do we reach out to somebody who has a big following and just say, hey, do you want to do a Instagram live together? Or is there a different thing that you're doing?
So yeah, you can do that. But my thing is basically come on my podcast. And then after we do the episode, we clip 20 clips from it. And then when we post those clips, you can request a collaboration in Instagram when you post it. And then they can accept or deny that collaboration or just ignore the request. So anytime we post a clip, when it's not just me in it, we're asking for collaborations. Probably 75% of them get turned down, but 25% of them get accepted. And then those ones blow up.
So correct me if I'm wrong. You make a post on Insta and somehow you tell the algorithm with this collaboration button that it's not only going to be on my feed, but it's also going to be on someone else's feed. They don't have to post it. They just say accept and it goes onto theirs.
Correct. Yeah. It shows it to both audiences.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a really great feature. But the bottom line is, if you didn't have a good guest who already had an existing audience and you didn't create good content in the interview, and then you didn't clip and find good shareable content from that interview, then requesting the collaboration is inconsequential. It's never going to get accepted. Yeah. Right. The key is the first three things. You have to find good guests that have an audience already. Right. And then you have to ask good questions during the interview. And then you have to clip clips from the interview to post. And then at that point, they're way more likely to accept the collaboration. So
let's just pretend you clipped 15. You got 15 good quotes. How do you go about doing that? Do you post 15 different times and ask for collaborations? Okay.
Yeah, why not? You know what I mean?
It's not like
social media is free. We post 300 to 400 times a month on all of our channels. If you combine all of our channels and all of our posting schedule, we're posting 300 to 400 times a month across all of our channels.
That adds up to being more than 10 times a day on average, right?
Yeah. If you measure it across all of our channels, that's how often we're posting stuff. So why not? You know, you don't know what the algorithm's going to like. I used to get really caught up in this. I think this is really important. I used to get really caught up in having consistency and engagement and likes and stuff in between posts. And so I'd be like, well, I don't want to post another one because I'm going to take away from this one. And I don't want to post this there because then this one might only have 44 likes. And then this one next to it has 582 likes. And that doesn't look right. And somebody looking at my profile is going to think that it's just at some point just got over that. And I was like, the algorithm is going to do what it's going to do. The more stuff I give it, the more likely it's going to take off. And the faster I can learn what that algorithm likes so that I can create more content that's likely to take off in a shorter period of time. If you're posting 15 times a month on Instagram, then you're getting data every other day. If I'm posting 4 times a day on Instagram, I'm getting data 4 times per day. Factor that over 3 months, and I have exponential amount of data, more than you have, that allows me to be able, and my team to be able to go in and start creating stuff that's more likely to be shared or more likely to be collaborated on or whatever.
So if I pull, or if you pull out 15 or 20 different pieces of an episode that you do, where do we put these? Is it on YouTube? Is it on TikTok? Is it on Insta? Is it stories? Is it reels? Is it posts? The answer is yes.
Yes. All of the above. Short form vertical video is kind of the game right now, because that's what every algorithm is optimizing for, that ever since TikTok took over YouTube as in terms of most watch hours of any platform. Every platform's still optimizing for a short form video. That's why YouTube has shorts. They have their own shorts feed. Facebook and Instagram have reels. And then obviously TikTok has vertical video. And then even Pinterest has vertical video now. So everybody's optimizing for vertical video. Create these shorts and put them everywhere that accepts them. It's kind of funny because sometimes we'll have people, we'll have a clip that pops off on TikTok and gets 2 million views on TikTok. And then we post it on Instagram and it gets 4,000 views. You don't know what you don't know. So you may as well just post more. And if you look at all of the top people, Hormozy and Gary Vee and Evan Carmichael, all the top creators, especially within the entrepreneurship community, they're all posting with that type of volume. There's something to that. So here's an example. I think you can see that right there. So at the top, you see how it says Brian Callen and Travis Chappell.
And for our listener, will you explain what you're showing?
Yeah, so this is just a post from my Instagram of I interviewed this comedian, Brian Callen, who I'm a big fan of. We put out a couple clips and he accepted a couple of those collaborations. So on the feed, it looks like on the top, instead of just saying Travis Chappell, it says Brian Callen and Travis Chappell. So then when I go into insights here, this video has 167,000 plays almost, 4,700 likes, 100 comments, 1,130 shares, and over 300 saves. And so total reach on this was close to 200,000 in terms of impressions across Facebook and Instagram. And that came from finding and interviewing somebody really cool and interesting, having a good conversation that's out of the ordinary for that person, and then finding good clips from that make them look really good and put them in a positive light, and then sharing it, requesting a collaboration. That's it.
Good stuff. I'm going to take a quick break. When we get back, I have 3 things that I really want to discuss with you. And one of them is just how to ask better questions.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned how that is important. Another one is talking about your own podcast and the rebrand, what's going right, what's not going right, what it's like, and if we should do it. And the third is just to getting your very first good guest, because you mentioned the clout that you get with a good guest. But how did you get that very, very, very first one? All right, so we'll be back talking about better questions, rebranding, and getting your first good guest.
Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links, just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show.
We're back with Travis Chappell, and we've gotten through a lot of cool stuff, learned a lot of interesting things. One of the biggest ones that stuck with me so far, I don't know about you, the listener, but it's all about collaborations and how to do that. So I'm stoked to try that out for the first time, really genuinely. But we wanted to talk about 3 different things with Travis after the break. And the first one is how to ask better questions. So if you want to be better at asking questions, Travis, obviously you've learned this over 800 plus episodes. What would you tell the listener?
Yeah, the first thing is that it's just a matter of reps. The best way to get good at anything is to go do it. I think we have a tendency, probably just because of the total sheer volume of content that exists in the world today, we have a tendency to overlearn before we execute. You're going to sit there and try to learn about raising capital for your startup for 18 months until you actually go ask somebody for money. You're going to sit there and learn about how to podcast. You're going to sit there and learn about how to build a business. And you're just on a constant hamster wheel of, learning and using that as an excuse for not getting into it. Cause you tell yourself, I just want to be really good. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it the right way. And it's like, cool, I get that. And there is some of that to that. And there should probably be more prep going into things, but action always supersedes any of that. So the number one thing is just go start interviewing people, and you'll start seeing how difficult it is. Now, I understand I'm talking to a little bit maybe more sophisticated audience. Maybe they already have a podcast launched. They're in year 1 and they want to know how to ask better questions. So the next thing I would say is the only way to make up for lack of experience is over preparation. So when I first started, I would prep a minimum of a half hour for every interview for like the bigger names. Like anytime I landed a big name who had been interviewed a lot, it was always 3 to 5 hours of prep time for those bigger interviews, sometimes more. Like if they had a book, I would try to read all of their book, at least some of their book, a couple of chapters, go listen to them on 3 to 5 other podcasts and hear what they talk about a lot. You have to keep in mind that you want to create good content for your audience, but you also want to make sure that you're creating good content for that guest. And that typically, those 2 things are typically intertwined, because if you get your guest talking about something that they're passionate about, they're more likely to give you some golden nuggets around that thing. And your audience is more likely to walk away with actionable insights and practical advice and tips that they can implement, or at least a funny story or an anecdote. You made them laugh. Like there's some sort of value that they got from that episode if you take the time to prepare properly and look for those things. So I call them passion points. Like look for the passion points from that person. What are the things that they're really interested in talking about? What are the things that get them fired up? You can always tell there's a change in tonality. There's a change in inflection. If you're watching on YouTube or something, there's a change even in like posture and positioning and body language that happens when somebody goes from being on autopilot and just answering questions because everybody asks them the same questions. They switch from that into this powerful energy that gives them this voice to talk about this thing that they're passionate about. So I try to search people's passion points in prep time. I try not to use interrogative questions 100% of the time.
I don't know what that means, so maybe the listener doesn't either.
Sure. So an interrogative question would be anything that would be stereotypical as a question. So like when we work with clients one-on-one, we used to say like, hey, write out 50 questions that you think would be good questions to ask random guests on your show. And we'd make them write out 50 questions. Whenever we'd get the list back, it's usually starting with an interrogative word: who, what, where, when, why, how. And that makes a lot of sense because that's typical questioning format. However, in an interview, I've found that having a little bit more, it's almost like it's like Chat GPT, right? Like the better you get at prompting it, the better responses you're going to get from the AI. It's like the same thing with interviews. Like the better you are at prompting the guest, the better content you're going to be able to extract from that person. And
can you give one example, like one live example of a bad question and a better question?
Yeah, I'll give you 3 question formats. So I always tell people, remember your buddy Ted, TED. Tell me about, explain to me how, describe for me. Instead of what inspired you to become an entrepreneur. Tell us the story of how you got started with your company. Tell me about why that event had such an impact on you. You know, like saying, tell me about prompts a story. It doesn't prompt a question. And stories are the best way to disseminate information and make an impact on the listener, because stories relate to people. And ultimately, the reason that people aren't getting results most of the time is they're telling themselves the wrong story. They believe like success doesn't start with the result. It starts with the belief that it can happen. You know what I mean? Like it starts with mindset. Do I even believe this is possible? Then it goes to desire. Do I want this for myself? And then it goes to action. Can I do something about it? And then it goes to cycling that over and over again before you reach the moment of success. But if you never start with the thing that like, hey, I believe this is possible for me, or I believe that I can do this, or I believe something, you have to believe something positive about what you're wanting to go get, or you're never going to start. It will be prohibitive in your ability to take action. And the best way to get people to believe those things and to change somebody's belief system around how they think about themselves or around what they think is possible is stories. And so you as a host, if you're trying to, especially if you have like an education show, you're a coach, or you have a business show, you're probably doing some sort of education. That's the value you provide. It's probably not an entertainment show. Okay. So if you're trying to provide that value, then you got to provide that value. And the best way to do that is through stories. You know, I can sit here and tell you how to go start a podcast and grow your audience and how to push through the first couple months and how to monetize. And here's 4 ways, and I can do it blog style article. And I can do that right now. But the bottom line is it's going to be way more impactful if I tell you my story of exactly what I did, the obstacles that I hit, and how I overcame them. That will relate to the audience more and will give them more inspiration and will instill more of a belief system in them that it's possible for them, because they're hearing my story. They're not just hearing facts or stats, and they're not just hearing the 1, 2, 3 steps. They're hearing a story, and then you can pull the practical side out of it. So I try to get as many stories as I can to tell me about, explain to me how, describe for me is super helpful. I'll say stuff like set the scene for us instead of saying like, a lot of people start with these generic questions like, tell us about yourself, 30 seconds, and it's like, okay, they won't say tell me about, because that follows my rule of tell me about, but they'll say something about, what inspired you to become an entrepreneur or whatever. Those generic questions you get at the beginning of interviews that frankly don't mean anything and just usually tells you that the person didn't do enough research to know anything about you and can't effectively introduce you to their own audience. So now you have to do their job for them. That's usually what that means, right? So instead, what I try to do is say like set the scene, what it was like growing up for you at age 9. It's the same question. It's just way more specific. So now instead of like, it gets them out of their scripted answer. That's kind of the whole idea and thought behind it is like people have these scripted answers. And I do the same thing. And I'm sure you do too. I get interviewed all the time by people. So yeah, like just habitually, I've figured out over 400 times of being interviewed by people that if somebody asks me that question, this is the easiest way for me to tell that story. And it sounds almost identical every single time.
Yeah.
But when I go to somebody and say like, hey, bring it back to when you were 9, set the scene for us and tell us what it was like being you at 9 years old. That all of a sudden they literally start going like, oh man, 9-year-old me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I have this memory when I was in such and such city in such and such state. And my mom, who was a chiropractor, she said to me that I was never going to be able to do this thing. And like, that was actually one of the first times that I remember, you know what I mean? Like you just immediately start getting into better stuff that's unscripted. It's off the beaten path. You know, like my biggest compliment that I receive as an interviewer, the thing that I'm trying to get in every interview is when people go, oh, no one's ever asked me that before. Or, wow, I've never talked about this on a podcast before, but here we go. Like those are always the best thing for me because I don't want them to be scripted when they come on my show. You know what I mean? Like I want to have a real conversation. And to do that, you got to bump people off of autopilot sometimes. And I found that the like phrasing questions like that will more effectively do that than other potential methods.
Love it. So then in that case, explain to me. See, I'm already a good question asker.
Boom.
Explain to me about your rebrand. Like what made you rebrand, and was it everything that you hoped, or did it kind of like, was it not as good?
That's a good question. So the reason that I did it was kind of what I was alluding to earlier. My show was becoming more of an energy suck on me than it was giving me energy. And that's like the opposite of the reason I started my show. So what ended up happening was I started my software company, Guestio, in 2021. We raised a $1.3 million seed round for Guestio at the end of 2021. And then in 2022, I started an agency off of the back end of the software that does the same thing the software does. So Guestio connects podcasters to guests and guests to podcasters. So my agency now does the same thing, except it's done for you. So we get people booked on podcasts and we help podcasters get good guests. And we'll be your full-time booking manager essentially on your team. And so I got really, really busy with the companies, and enough to where my podcast was taking a back seat. I wasn't doing guest outreach anymore. I was bringing my producer on to host half of the episodes. My listenership was going down, and I was taking interviews from publicists that were reaching out to me just because I didn't have any active interviews on the calendar because I wasn't doing active guest outreach because I was too busy. It just got to the point where I was like, this is a drag and it's not making me the money that it used to. My audience is slowly dying. I don't feel like I have a community with my audience anymore, which I used to feel like I did, even when my show was 1/10 of the size that it was. So there was just so many things. I was like, why am I even still doing this? Doesn't make any sense for my time. And so it got down to probably summer of last year. And I said to my team, we either need to stop the show or we need to do exactly what I want to do with the show, even if it means that I lose business over it because it's no longer like the top of my funnel. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. So my show for almost 800 episodes, actually 800 episodes, I think exactly, was Build Your Network was the name of the show. We talked specifically about building relationships for entrepreneurs, but it's super, super niche. And frankly, I talked to the majority of the people that I wanted to talk to about it. And it just had kind of run its course. So I was like, I keep doing this, or I can go do something I really want to do again. So that's kind of the reason for the rebrand. The rebrand now is called Travis Makes Friends, my show. It's been much more exciting for me. I've been talking to people I really want to talk to. I've been getting excited about guest outreach again. Gotten some great guests on the show. Got a lot of great feedback because I'm in it again, you know? So like my interviews have gotten that much better because I'm actually preparing and I'm excited for them. And I come to the table with good energy and good questions. And then we've dumped a good amount of money, tens of thousands of dollars now into advertising the show after the relaunch. And so now our downloads are almost a 10x of what they were in, last August or last September, continuing to grow. And I think it's going to be easier the more and better guests we have, the way the show continues to grow. So yeah, for me, it was a total win in every sense. I would recommend it for people, like I said before, that if you feel like you just have a podcast because somebody told you to have a podcast and then they told you that your podcast had to be about your coaching business or there's no reason to do it, and you feel like you're burning out and it's like a drag on you and it's not producing what you wanted to produce, and your other income generating activities produce more income than your podcast and you're about ready to give up on it, before you give up on it, try doing what I did and see if it changes for you.
when we do it, we got to put tens of thousands of dollars behind the rebrand?
Absolutely not. No, it's just a matter, it just means that you're starting to measure it in other terms rather than, hey, what's my ROI? Or like, how many coaching clients are we bringing off my podcast? This number? Oh, well, that's a bad month. Oh, this number, that was worse than last month. We're going down. Like, this doesn't make any sense for me to continue doing this anymore. It's like, well, if you change your show a little bit to talk about something that you care about, maybe even if it's not even like a specific topic, it's just more generic. That's kind of how mine was. We just went to a broader audience. We still talk about a lot of the same stuff. If you listen to my show pre-rebrand and post-rebrand, like I interview fairly similar. The things we talk about are kind of the same. The interviews are a lot longer and most of them are in person now. So there's a little bit of a different dynamic. I think that's better. But essentially very similar. Like we talked about networking before. It's called Travis Makes Friends now because I basically learned after doing 800 episodes that networking and making friends should be the same activity. And the people who treat networking like it's a different activity typically are the worst at networking. Rebranded Travis Makes Friends just because like it's a broader audience. Now I can talk to somebody who doesn't really care about networking and they can still come into my audience and listen to the really helpful and valuable information that we're getting on the show. And we sneak in networking pieces because like it's really just we're just trying to help people more effectively communicate, ask better questions, make more friends, and become a better version of themselves along the way. So like, it's kind of the same. It just allows me to talk to more people. And it's something that I'm just more interested in. Sometimes the success of your show is not measured in metrics or downloads or ROI or how many sales you made in your business. If you're not enjoying any of it and it takes away energy from you, change it, do something different. There's no rule or law that says that, I'm a business coach, so my podcast has to be about building businesses because it doesn't make sense to do anything else. And it's like, well, maybe not. You asked me a question at the very beginning of this, I think, a pre-interview, and you were like, hey, is your podcast directly, is your podcast your business? Like, is it the top piece of your business? And I was like, kinda, because basically everything I do is an extension of something I've done on the podcast, a guest that I've interviewed, somebody I got an introduction to, a stage I spoke on because I had a podcast. Like almost everything in my life in terms of relationships, my businesses, how much money I make, the income we generate stems from my podcast in one way or another. It's just that somebody is more likely to work with me when they come to my show and see that I interviewed Shaq, even if I don't talk about the thing that I work with people on in my show. Does that make sense? Like it's just immediate like credibility, authority. They associate you with somebody that they already know, like, and trust. So it makes it easier to sell whatever it is that you're selling, even though it's maybe not directly tied to the topic of whatever your business or your service or your product is. Now, I typically recommend people start there when they don't know where to start. It's like, well, you don't know where to start with a podcast. You have a business about, coaching people about running businesses. Maybe start there. It's a good place. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm a fan of that. I just am cautious to tell people like, you should only do it this way. So this is the beauty of podcasting is that it could be its standalone business. It could be a hobby. It could be the entry point for your business. It could be a lead generator. It could be a brand builder. It could be whatever you want it to be. You just have to make sure that you're doing something that actually serves you and feeds you. And like the longevity game to me is more important. Yeah. So if you think that if you keep doing what you're doing and you're likely to burn out in 6 months, then maybe alter where you're headed so that when you fast forward the clock in 8 years, you still got a show going because those are the people that are going to win.
Is there any drawbacks? Like, I guess I should say, describe for the listener who's been doing this for a year, maybe 2, and they might be thinking about doing a rebrand. Are there any drawbacks to like what they might encounter?
Maybe it really just depends on like the size of your audience and how long you've been podcasting, how dramatic the pivot is. Like if you go from talking about entrepreneurship to talking about how to fix a sail on your sailboat, there may not be like a big draw or correlation there. You might just start a new show. So the answer is a little bit nuanced, but there was not really a lot of negatives for me doing it. It reinvigorated me, gave me more energy about the show, gave me we had a month of downtime. So 2 months, maybe. I think we stopped releasing at the end of October and then November, December, we were working on the rebrand and then relaunched it in January. So it gave me a couple months to get some interviews back in the bank so that I wasn't worried and stressed when we relaunched the new show. So yeah, overall, it was a positive experience. It was, the downside would be work. It was just more work again. Okay. Once you're in a flow with your show and you're creating and stuff, like keeping it going is easier than the energy that you put into launching a new thing. So that was a lot. But other than that, it was good. I'm happy that I did it.
Explain to me how you got your first good guest.
this is really the leverage point, because it feels impossible to go get Shaq on your show. And most of the time it is impossible to get Shaq on your show, but it isn't literally impossible. And that was like the first, like I said, everything starts with mindset. And that was the first epiphany that I had that really made me just start reaching for the stars. Because I was like,
literally for the stars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just like, it's not like it's actually impossible. The only people that are impossible to interview are dead people. Anybody that's alive, it is technically possible to interview them. It's even more possible if you've already seen them do other podcasts. Some people just don't do podcast interviews. Like you've never seen The Rock do a podcast interview, like a full like hour, 2 hour long conversation. I don't know that exists. Maybe it does. Maybe I just don't know of it. But some people do the circuit. Shaq is one of those people. He has his own podcast and he does other people's podcasts fairly frequently. Kevin Hart, same way. So there's levels to like how impossible or how potentially possible somebody is to get. But once I really had that epiphany of like, if somebody has a pulse, there's a way that I can get in contact with them. The question then becomes, am I willing to do the work that's required to find that way for this guest? That becomes the question, because if you want to interview these huge names and you're starting from scratch, like I was, like I didn't have a network of people when I started. I didn't have a business. Like I said, I was a 24-year-old door-to-door sales guy living in Fresno, California. I didn't know any millionaires, let alone like have a friend millionaire that I could call up and be like, hey, let's do a podcast together. And can you introduce me to all your friends that are millionaires that I can interview? I didn't have any of that. I was starting from scratch. And just like probably a lot of your listeners are. If you're starting from scratch, that's kind of another reason to commit to the longevity, because it's going to be insanely difficult, barring any sort of like miracle or just really, really lucky moment. It's going to be really, really difficult for you to get these massive names on. But if you stick to it, you build an audience and you start getting this person and you get that person and you get that person and you get that person, you're constantly leveling up the people you're talking to, the content that you're putting out, and the size of your audience. It is possible. It's totally doable. And once you do it once, it makes you realize how much more possible it is, and it makes it easier for everything else moving forward. So the first like big guest that I got on with, especially as it relates to the entrepreneurial space, was Grant Cardone. And the way that I did it, the first time I reached out to him was before I launched my show, and I got ignored. It wasn't even like read, which is totally understandable because I hadn't even launched a show yet. And there was no reason why anybody should have given me the time of day. And I fully accept that. And then I started interviewing. So what I did is I started interviewing people that I knew he knew already and had a relationship with, but they were easier gets at the time because they didn't have as big of a brand name as he did. So the next time I reached out to him, this was like 9 months later. So I reached out to him in like September, October, or whatever of 2017 or something. And then I reached out again in maybe March or April of 2018. But the only thing that changed during my reach out was I dropped every name of the people that I had interviewed that I knew that he knew, including his own wife. So I interviewed Elena, I interviewed, Brad Lee and Ed Milet and all these other people that I knew were like speaking on his stage. So not only did I know that he knew them, but I knew that he respected them to at least a certain extent, or he wouldn't have brought them on his stage. So I listed like 10 names in that second reach out. And then I fibbed a little bit and I told him that I was going to be in Miami the next week and I could just stop by and knock out the interview. So he messaged me back and said, yeah, let's do it. Come through. Here's my assistant's number, and sent me his assistant's number to schedule it. And as soon as I scheduled it, I went and booked my flight to go to Miami because I wasn't going to go to Miami already. But yeah, basically just like I made it as easy, like your job is to make it as easy as possible for the guest to say yes. How can you do that? Well, credibility is one huge piece. Like you don't want to give people homework. If the guest that you're reaching out to knows zero things about you, make it really easy for them to find information about you or give them the information they need in the reach out message. And that's really the key. Is like, I don't want people having to go to Google to see who I am or if I'm worth doing an interview with. Now, some of them will. And at this point, I have a decent Google presence. But at the time, I didn't. When I was first starting, I didn't. So my goal was to get them to say yes before they went to Google or before they asked me about my download numbers, because my download numbers weren't good. Grant Cardone came on my show when I had 400 downloads an episode. I didn't have a massive show. I just had the credibility. Is like, oh, well, if these 12 people that I know, like, and trust spent time with you and thought it was a valid use of their time, then I don't have to go do further research to decide that I also think that you're a good use of my time.
Yeah.
If you're willing to come through the office, make it really easy for me just to step in from like my meeting that I had across the hall to step into my studio where I record all the time, and you're going to be here and you've already emailed all these people, then yeah, sure, let's do it. Let's come through. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
But he didn't have to do any additional research. That's where people lose it, is that you forget that really busy people, their number one value, their number one asset in life is time. The most successful people on the planet understand a very, very important truth that 90% of the population will never understand. Time is the ultimate asset that we have in life. And rich people trade money for time all the time. Almost exclusively, they trade money for time. You know what I mean? Sure. Hiring people, investing money, all of those things are just an effort to get more time back. Hiring a coach, joining a mastermind, those are investments to get more time back, to accelerate the learning curve, to shave years off of mistakes that you might have made. Anyway, that's a different conversation. So the core principle is basically know that rich and successful people, even if they're not rich, whatever, the people that you want to interview the most are busy. And busy people's number one asset is their time. And so if you do not make it as easy as possible for them to say yes, and they have to go do more research and go do more homework, it's almost impossible to actually get them to do it.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes because like when I first started, I used to think like, it's not that big of a deal, And then I started getting busier. And then I had a startup, and then we were raising money, and then I had 2 kids, and it was like, oh, you know what I mean? Like and my audience started getting bigger. My email is starting to get bigger. People started reaching out to me a lot. And it was like, oh, I totally get it now. It's not a factor of like, I'm being a douche and I just want to ignore you and not spend time with anybody and not help anybody out. That's not my desire. My desire is to help as many people as I can, but literally cannot do that. I literally cannot help everybody. Like in terms of a one-on-one basis, like giving them an interview or doing a coaching call or, giving them free advice and messages. Like I cannot take the physical time that it would take to do those things. So if you're reaching out, you have to have a more compelling reason, and you have to give me that reason in a short message that doesn't take 3 hours to read through, and without me having to go like, all right, well, let's go see what this person is about. Got to go to Google, check out their Instagram, look at their social sites, like look at their podcasts, look at their YouTube channel, look at their website, and decide whether or not it's worth like going on the show. And that's why most of those people have, like we were talking about at the beginning, they have those gatekeepers that prevent you from wasting their time, because their time is their number one thing. So don't waste people's time.
So Travis, we've already got Guestio.com in the show notes. We also have the link to Travis Makes Friends, the new rebrand of your show, in the show notes. Can you give me your IG handle as well?
Yep. It's just at Travis Chappell, first and last name, Chappell. P. That'll be in the show notes as well. And yeah, really appreciate you jumping on, going through all of this. Got a lot of good information. I think the listener did as well. Asking better questions, rebrand, getting that first good guest, talking about collaborations. I'd love to have you on because I think we could go into some more of this as well. There's a lot that you said, but we'll end here. Be so good. You'll have to remind me who said this. Be so good that they can't ignore you. Who said that? Steve Martin.
It's good.
Who embodied that quote and got very good at what he did. But yeah, dude, thanks for having me. I know sometimes I can get a little aggressive on these, but I appreciate the opportunity. Just know that everything that I said is basically just me trying to figure everything out. And whenever I get a little bit more combative about it, it's just because I see people giving bad advice a lot. And it's just irritating to me because I know that they're steering people in the wrong direction. Well, hopefully something I said will resonate with somebody listening. And I'd love to hear from you if it did.
Thank you. All right. Go to Guestio.com. Check him out on social if you'd like to. And then I would also go and look at Travis Makes Friends. See you guys on the next episode.
By the way, one way to ensure that you don't miss out on great content that we're producing on a regular basis is to make sure you're subscribed to the show. You need to be subscribed or following the Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to it in order not to miss all of that. And before I let you go, I need to mention, because a lot of people are asking, do you help? Can you help me with this? And the answer is yes. My company actually does it. It's called Grow Your Show. And you can find that at growyourshow.com. Our clients, they call us the easy button for podcaster because they simply have to record their episode. And they know that every single thing else is done for them. we sweat the hard stuff so you can be the star of your show. And if you would like help to make sure that we're editing and publishing and promoting and doing your social media, it's all in one place. And I think it's pretty affordable. You'll have to take a look for yourself. Just go to growyourshow.com and check us out. And by the way, I'll see you on the next episode.